I've been a nurse for over 10 years and have been in the healthcare field for almost 20 years. As a nurse and a scary story narrator, I often get asked if I've ever experienced anything paranormal. To be honest, I have. Sometimes I recount these experiences as if they happened to someone else, but in reality, they happened to me. In this video, I'm going to share my personal experiences working in the healthcare field for almost 20 years. I remember when I first started as a certified nursing assistant at a nursing home. I was being trained by a senior CNA during the day shift before transitioning to the night shift. About 4 weeks into my training on the day shift, an 84-year-old man passed away. His children were coming from out of town. The female CNA had already bathed the expired patient and dressed him in a nice gown, but he needed a shave. Since I was the only guy working there that day, the girls asked me to shave the patient. I didn't expect to shave a patient who had already passed away, but it was a shocking moment for me. I remember going into the room alone after everyone else had done their part. It was my first time being so close to a deceased body, and I felt extremely uncomfortable. I even questioned whether the healthcare field was right for me. However, in less than 5 minutes, I was able to give him a good shave and leave the room feeling like I had lost a piece of my soul due to being too scared. After completing my training on the day shift, I was on my own for the night shift. Everyone starts on the night shift because it's slower paced. This 140 beds. In this nursing facility, we had a big storage room used for broken beds and wheelchairs. The night staff would sometimes take naps on the broken beds in there. Being new to the place and to the night shift, I wasn't used to staying up all night, so I would often get very sleepy around 1 a.m., 4 a.m. During my breaks, I would eat my food and use my lunch break to take a nap in that big room. One night around 3 a.m., I clocked out for my lunch break and went to the storage room. When I arrived, the door was slightly open. I thought someone might already be napping inside, but upon looking, I found the first bed empty. I entered the dark room without turning on the light to avoid disturbing the person on the other bed, separated by a curtain. When I got in, the person on the next bed said, "Close the door." I reached out and pushed the door closed. After about 10 minutes of sleep, the door suddenly opened and the lights turned on. I woke up and in my sleepy state, I saw 2 men from the morgue walked in with a metal gurney. They apologized for waking me up from my nap and went behind the curtain. Then I heard them counting, 1, 2, and 3. I heard the sound of something heavy being placed on their metal gurney. They returned from behind the curtain with somebody in a body bag on their gurney. Before leaving, one of them asked if I wanted the light off, and I declined. This experience made me wonder if the person on the other side of the curtain was a recently deceased patient. I peeked behind the curtain, but found no one there. Feeling scared, I left the room. After that incident, I no longer took naps during my night shifts. Later, I learned that a patient in another wing had passed away earlier, and the staff had placed the body in that room where I had gone to nap. It was common practice to clean up the body and transfer it to the storage room for the morgue transporters to collect. After working there for a while, I learned to be more cautious, especially during night shifts. After becoming a registered nurse, I began working on the telemetry floor at the hospital. One day, a patient in his 90s was brought in due to bradycardic episodes that caused him to black out at home. The doctor determined that his medication was causing his heart rate to drop dangerously low at times. After a few days, when he stabilized, the doctor prepared to discharge him back home with his family. While helping him get dressed, he began to turn pale, and his heart rate dropped significantly, prompting a code blue. An EKG technician was also presented in the room, and she was pale-looking. I asked if she's okay, and she said on her way up she saw the same patient in the elevator. She was wondering if the patient we're currently coding and the one in the elevator is the same person. The way she looked and how she said it sent chills all over my body. Despite our efforts, the patient passed away. In the intensive care unit, ICU, where I later transferred, there was a room known as Room 14, which had a reputation for being spiritually problematic, or what we called bad juju. Such beliefs Patients placed there often experienced unexpected complications, regardless of their initial condition. During a night shift, a severely ill patient was admitted to room 14. His condition deteriorated rapidly, and despite our efforts, he went into cardiac arrest. During the chaos of the code blue, I witnessed what appeared to be a shadowy leg descending from the ceiling vent, before disappearing back into the vent. I thought maybe it's 3 a.m. and I'm just tired and seeing things. However, there was a tap on my shoulder and I turned to look. It was the house supervisor. He asked, "You saw that too?" I told him that I did. When the house supervisor confirmed seeing the same thing, I felt a sense of unease. Fortunately, the patient's family decided to cease resuscitative efforts, allowing him to pass peacefully. During the lockdown in 2020, a critically ill patient's family, unable to enter the hospital, brought traditional funeral clothing for their loved one. Since the patient and I are the same ethnicity and culture, I assisted my co-workers in dressing the patient in these garments before she passed away. A week later, one of the grandmas in my circle of relatives comes in as a patient to our unit. She's not my patient, but since we're related, I just wanted to stop by to say hi. The following night, my coworker wanted me to translate for her, so I went back into the grandma's room to help translate. After translating for the grandma, my coworker thanked me, and she left to do some charting at the nurse's station. I was still in the room talking to the grandma, and she said, "Son, the other night, there was a Hong auntie that came in here and said her family wasn't allowed to come in, so you helped her get dressed up. She just wants to thank you. Maybe this grandma was just a little off because of the medicines she's getting in the ICU." But hearing that sent chills all over my body. After working night shifts for a few years, I decided to switch to day shifts. One time, we had a young patient who came to our unit because he was very short of breath due to a weak heart. We placed him in room 18. Unfortunately, our hospital is not known for its cardiac service, and often, when there is a case that requires a higher level of care, we attempt to stabilize the patient and then transfer them to a different hospital. This man was much too young. When he was admitted to our unit, our doctor wanted to transfer him to a higher level of care. We tried to stabilize him while our case manager worked on arranging the transfer. Around 3 p.m., we were able to transfer him by helicopter. Once he was transferred, the housekeeper came in and cleaned up room 18. Around 5 p.m., my coworker Jerry and I were at the nurse's station when suddenly a flatline reading appeared on the monitor. Jerry and I both looked at it, and the heart flatline reading was coming from room 18. The room was still empty. We could both see the room from the nurse's station, and there was no new patient there yet. About 10 minutes later, our unit manager came in and informed us that the patient we transferred out didn't make it. He died on the way there. That was so strange. I remember one day when I went to work, I had a very sick and critical patient who required one-to-one care. She was in her late 70s and very ill. Her liver and kidneys were shutting down. She required a lot of medications just to keep her alive. These medicines were mixed in little bags of fluids that we administered to the patient through their IV. The problem was that her kidneys were no longer functioning, so she wasn't producing any urine. This meant that the more medicine we gave her, the more fluids built up in her body. She was becoming more and more fluid overloaded, usually for a patient who is no longer producing urine. We can remove the excess fluids from her body by performing dialysis. However, her blood pressures were critically low, so if we removed any fluids from her body, she would crash and die. She was still a full code. Usually, if there's a family member, the doctor will talk to the family member to make a decision, instead of prolonging the suffering. However, this patient had a conservator, which meant that even when she wasn't sick, she didn't have the capability to make her own medical decisions. It was the conservator who would make that decision. However, it was the weekend, and our doctors weren't able to get a hold of the conservator. I remember my first day when I had this poor lady as my patient. She was so sick that I thought she wouldn't last 2 hours into my shift. However, I was wrong. She lasted the whole day until the change of shift. Even the nurse who gave me report that morning came back for her night shift, and was surprised that the patient was still alive. For us nurses, we do not wish for any of our patients to die. However, in cases like this, it's just so hard. And if you have a heart, you'd wish they would go peacefully instead of suffering any longer. I went home that night thinking that the poor lady wouldn't make it until the morning. However, when I came back the next day, she was still alive. She was in a coma and on all kinds of medications, but she was still holding on. This poor lady's perfusion was so bad that her toes and fingers were blue and black. I'm not a religious person, but in my heart, I hoped that if there's a God, please take her. I don't mind taking care of her. She's my only patient, so it makes my job easy. However, I couldn't tolerate seeing this kind of suffering. I wondered if she was waiting for someone. On my third day, when I came back in the morning, she was still alive. After the night nurse gave me a report on the patient, I went to the nurse's station to grab a marker so I could use it in the room. I remembered when I went back to the room. I opened the door and stepped in. My eyes were on the patient, who was in a coma. Then, in the corner of my right side, I saw someone standing by the wall of the room. I turned to look, and it was a boy, about 14 years old, blonde hair and about 5 feet 4 inches tall. He was wearing a shirt with black and gold checker patterns. The boy gave me a little smile, then he sidestepped behind the extra unused ventilator in the room and sat down. I went over to look, and he was gone. Right then, I knew that my patient would probably pass that day. Around 11 a.m., her heart stopped. We tried to resuscitate her for 20 minutes without any success. The doctors knew how sick she was, so we didn't continue the resuscitation efforts for very long. I've been in the healthcare field for almost 20 years. I've encountered some strange things. However, this is the one experience. That makes me believe that there are ghosts and spirits. Maybe there's an afterlife. I don't know. I still wonder who that boy is. Maybe he's her grandson, or maybe her son who passed away a long time ago. I don't know. I'm just glad that she's no longer suffering. That's all for this video. Thank you for making all the way through and supporting my stories. Have a wonderful day or night.